diplomacy, but there are economic tools as well.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. McCaul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say, Mr. Secretary, that the chairman and I will be working in a bipartisan fashion to plus up your budget. I think we need stability throughout the globe, and we look forward to working with you on that issue. Tomorrow, the chairman and I will be traveling to the Venezuelan border in Colombia. And I kind of have a two-part question. And first is, I don't think failure is an option here, but what would be the consequences for the United States and the region if Maduro succeeds in Venezuela? And second part is, if Maduro does not succeed, what would a post-Maduro reconstruction strategy look like?
So I'm of the nature that I try not to contemplate failure too often, but we have certainly considered what the risks are associated with the efforts that we've provided to date. And the efforts, frankly, you mentioned the Lima Group, all the countries in the region now, some 50-some that have recognized the proper leader as designated by the Venezuelan people through their constitution. Look, we've seen Russia continue trying to exert influence. We know that the Cubans are providing substantial support to the Maduro regime. Allowing Maduro to continue will have as its primary negative outcome continued destruction of the Venezuelan economy and real hardship for the Venezuelan people. It'll certainly have an importance in terms of the risk of terror, the risk of chaos, and that economic and refugees flowing from those regions, from Venezuela to the region as well. So there's lots of downside if the Venezuelan people's objective is not achieved. Second, the day and week after is going to be a long process. The Maduro regime's destruction of the economy in Venezuela is not as a result of the sanctions that the United States has put in place over the last months. This is years of socialist leadership that has completely put their primary revenue source, their fossil fuel resources, in a place that's going to cost, I've seen estimates between $6 and $12 billion in years to repair. So the day after means making sure that Cuban and Russian influence are out, Maduro and his cronies are all gone, and we begin to rebuild the democracy, and the world will have to provide the economic assistance to get them through this transition period. The United States will certainly be part of it, but I'm confident we will find the coalition that we've built, some 50 countries strong, that our State Department has built, will be part of that as well.
And thank you. I think it's a historic opportunity for the region, the hemisphere. I think it will transform Venezuela, which is now a failed state after it was a prosperous nation. And then now 20 years later, it's in utter chaos. And I think it would also impact Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia. It could really transform the Western Hemisphere and be a major foreign policy victory. On China, you know, as I get my threat briefings, Islamist terror has always been the focus, but it seems to me that China now is becoming more of the #1 threat in nation states. Can you tell me about the threat from China? In particular, what I'm concerned about is the One Belt, One Road initiative. Their theft of intellectual property. They're in our medical institutions, our universities. But the One Belt, One Road, they're literally over-leveraging countries, and particularly in Africa too, where they can take over these countries without a shot fired. And they are in Sri Lanka now. They have that port. And in Djibouti. What is the administration doing to counter the Chinese threat?
So the first thing we did is we identified it. Something previous administrations were loath to do. I get it. We have important economic interests with China. Many American jobs depend on that. President Trump is doing his level best to set the trade relationship so that it's fair and reciprocal. So I would describe that as the first thing the administration did. The second thing is we recognize this is a great power battle, and we're engaged in it across the world. It's our support of ASEAN. It's our identifying the threat from Chinese state-owned enterprise technology companies, sharing that with countries in the Middle East and in Europe, identifying these risks so that Western democracies around the world will wake up to the risks and will push back. And you mentioned One Belt, One Road in particular. We are doing our best to make sure that there are Western competitors every place there's a project that China is putting forth. We're happy to compete. If it's fair, transparent, open transaction, you know, the Chinese may win a few, but I am very confident that American businesses will do incredibly well there. What we've seen is just the opposite. We've seen transactions that weren't straight up, that weren't fair, that were designed with a national security interest and not an economic interest for the people of their country. State Department has shared with these countries and their people and their leadership the risks from entering into these. And frankly, I think countries throughout Asia, Southeast Asia, are waking up to this concern as well.
And let me just close. I know my time has expired. And just commending you for your engagement with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. I think that's vitally important given the threat that we face in the region. I also commend you for walking away from the table. I think the best thing Ronald Reagan did was walking away from the table from the Soviets, and then we ultimately saw the end of the Cold War. And I think just to get a deal like the Iran deal, for instance, it's not adequate. We need a good deal. And